Welcome to An Author's Voice, where I'll discuss the craft behind writing and illustrate the points with my own work or discuss other well-known examples. Why we all like story. What fiction does that nothing else can? I was 17 and it was past midnight, and I had school in the morning, and the book I was reading, Ender's Game, borrowed from a friend who'd said, "Just read it," with the intensity of someone trying to share something they couldn't explain, had done something to me I didn't have vocabulary for yet. It wasn't the plot. My friend had spoiled the twist without realizing it. So I'd known the shape of things going in. It wasn't escape. My life at 17 wasn't anything I needed to escape from. What had happened was something else. I had spent 300 pages inside a child's mind that was smarter and more isolated and more desperately trying to prove it was sufficient than any mind I'd personally inhabited. And somewhere in those pages I had found something I'd never found anywhere else. The experience had a specific texture. The slight loosening of a knot I hadn't known was there. The feeling, and I want to name it precisely, of not being the only person who had felt exactly like this, delivered to me by a character who didn't exist, written by a person I'd never met 30 years before I read the book. That's the phenomenon. That's what this essay is actually about. The reader's side of this transaction is harder to articulate than it appears, partly because we don't talk honestly about what's happening when we read. The official account, stories build empathy, they instruct, they entertain, isn't wrong exactly, but it's not the thing. It's the catalogue description for an experience that isn't like other experiences. What I mean by that, when you're at 1 a.m. and you can't put the book down even though you have to be functional tomorrow, the reason is not that you're being educated. The reason is that the story has opened an interior room you recognize, but have never been in before, and you're not ready to leave it yet. The two things stories do that nothing else does, and I've never found them substitutable, are these. First, they let you inhabit a consciousness that isn't yours without losing your own. Not escape. Expansion. What you're doing inside a novel isn't becoming someone else. You're remaining yourself while simultaneously running on a different person's premises, wiring, and prior damage. After a week inside a particular character's perspective, you have access to a range of human experience that would have taken real time to accumulate through living, and which living might never have delivered at all, because you will never be a 19th century governess, or an astronaut on a failing ship, or a child soldier in a satellite war, and now you have some working knowledge of what those interiors feel like from the inside. This is not vicarious experience in the diminished sense that phrase usually carries. You return to your own consciousness with more room in it than you had before. The second thing, stories allow emotions to be felt at full strength. This sounds small and isn't. Real grief comes with defense mechanisms. You can't fully feel the loss of someone you love at full intensity for more than short intervals, because full intensity is unsustainable, and the psyche protects itself. Fictional grief has no such protection, because the stakes aren't real, and so the defenses don't trip. When a character you've spent 300 pages with dies, the grief that arrives can be felt at its actual size, unmanaged, unreduced. I have cried at fictional deaths with more emotional completeness than I've cried at some real ones. The story makes a safe enough container that you can finally feel the thing at its full dimensions. That's not weakness, that's what the medium is for. When Ender stands at the end of that book, having been exactly what the adults needed him to be, and learning only then what it cost, what I was feeling at 17 wasn't pity for a fictional character. It was something I recognized about the specific shape of being used well by people who thought they were protecting you. The book had given me access to that feeling, complete and full-size and survivable, and I didn't have it on my own yet. The author's side is different, and it's worth being honest about both what's valuable in it and what's less flattering. Writing a story is not reading one from the inside. When I'm working on a scene, say, Malachi watching the banks of the Suez Canal go by, letting Set's territorial resonance slide past like a stranger's gaze, I am not illustrating something I already understand. I'm finding out what I think. The story isn't the product of the thinking. The story is how the thinking happens. This is the specific utility of fiction that I can't replicate by journaling or by conversation, the requirement that it be concrete, that an actual character in an actual moment do an actual thing, forces my understanding to become precise in ways that abstraction never demands. I couldn't have articulated what Malachi's worldview actually is, what it's correct about, what it's categorically unable to see, until I watched him miscalculate Lysandra. The scene told me what I thought. I didn't bring the thought to the scene. There's a satisfaction in building a system where all the parts eventually mean something, the planted detail that pays off, the character who seemed decorative turning out to be structural, that I've only ever felt in writing. It has something in common with mathematical elegance, the sense that the shape of the thing is right, that it couldn't have been otherwise. I won't pretend the less flattering motivations aren't also present. The desire to be seen, the desire to put a version of your understanding into the world that persists after you, the wish, which is almost too honest to write down to be remembered. These aren't shameful. They're just not the reasons I give in interviews. Naming them honestly doesn't make writing mercenary. It makes it human. Every serious writer has them. They're not the engine, but they're part of the fuel. What happens when a story works, when reader and writer actually meet across the gap, isn't communication in the ordinary sense. A text message communicates. What stories do is closer to recognition. The reader opens an interior room they've always had access to but never fully mapped, finds writing on the walls, and understands that someone else has been in this room. Not by accident. They were in this room because they were trying to find you. Years may have passed between the writing and the reading. The author may be dead. It doesn't matter. The recognition is immediate. Someone has been exactly here, felt exactly this, and decided to mark the walls so you'd know. That's why oral traditions preceded writing. That's why the Campfire Story and the Netflix series are doing the same thing at vastly different scales. Both are someone trying to say, before we all go back to our separate interiors, here is what I found in mine. Does any of this match? What I'm trying to do in Technomancer and Another Past is narrower than that general account. The interior room I'm trying to share is a particular one. What it feels like to be a person who thinks in systems, discovering that systems don't reach all the way down to what matters. Finn Miller can map the nodes, trace the composite paths, model the energy distributions, and keeps running into the wall of a power that requires relationship, not analysis. Paul Taylor knows the history and keeps finding that the future he knew is no longer the future that exists, and the gap between what he expected and what has happened is where he actually has to live. The recognition I'm hoping for is from anyone who has ever been genuinely competent and discovered that competence wasn't the whole answer, who has understood everything correctly and still missed the point. That room is probably not unique to me. I suspect you've been in it. What story hit you at exactly the right moment? Not because of what it was about, but because of what it gave you access to that you didn't have before. And do you think the person who wrote it was trying, deliberately or not, to hand you a map to a room they'd been in themselves? Thanks for listening to this episode. If you'd like to hear or read more of this sort of thing, subscribe to my email list and follow me on social media using the link below, or search online for Charlie For It, and you will likely find me. Until next time, thanks for following along. Voices for this recording provided by Speechify. All content written by Charlie For It. Any opinions expressed in this recording are solely the author's. Learn more at charlieforay.com.